Welcome you all on behalf of EduSet program. Today with us in the studio, Professor Pralay Kanoongo is present, and he has written several books on Hindu nationalism particularly. His first book is RSS Tryst with Politics, and this is quite well read book. It has really broken the path in the context of working on politics of a kind which we have seen reviving in the last few decades. His recent book, which is an edited volume, is Cultural Entrenchment of Hindutva, Local Mediations and Forms of Convergence, published by Routledge. This is the book which we will use to enter into the larger world of his thinking on the politics of Hinduism and what we call Hindutva, and the resurgence of the kind of radical religion all over the world. Professor Kanoongo teaches in Jawaharlal Nehru University in the Center for Political Studies. He is an expert of Indian politics and also diaspora politics. So he has a wide range of understanding of the role of religion, which is not only in the national politics but also internationally in the diaspora community, how religion plays a role and how it is linked with the other very important concept called nation. So and I also welcome Dr. Satish Jha, who will be basically commenting on the book. Our format will be that we'll raise certain preliminary questions to Dr. Kanoongo, and we'll request him to answer those questions to start with. Then we will engage into deeper issues that he has raised in this book. Professor Kanoongo, one of the issues that comes to our mind is that what is the motor force behind such a project? A project, I can see the index of the content of the book. Most of the authors that you have in this book are French authors. Are they French basically?
Yes.
Most of them. It's a collaborative project with the French intellectuals, and Pralay Kanoongo, Professor Pralay Kanoongo is the only Indian in this. So I would like to know what is the kind of frame of this project to start with, and what is the vantage point from where this project is trying to look at the issue of Hindutva in India.
This particular project came out of a deeper thinking on the concept or the project of Hindutva. If you look at most of the writings on Hindutva, they primarily focus on communal dimension, and also most of these works suggest that as if Hindutva begins and ends with communal conflicts. So the focus is on the actors, the strategies, the mobilization of Hindutva primarily, and you find many writings of prominent scholars, right, investigating this dimension and critiquing and making arguments on this. Well, I didn't know these French scholars, but after reading my previous work, they wrote to me that they are all anthropologists. So the main person who conceived this project is Dr. Daniela Berti, who has worked extensively in Himachal Pradesh, on Himachal Pradesh, Hindutva in Himachal Pradesh, worked on Vidya Bharati, worked on the RSS project on history writing, and she wrote to me that if we're thinking something different, and I find similar kind of approach, right, in your works. So could we really collaborate? And they invited me to come to Paris and to be part of the inauguration of this project. Then this project also, we realized that Hindutva is very, very complex, and political scientists, historians, sometimes overlook the nuanced dimensions, right? Because our focus is on state, on riots, on mobilization. So actually, how Hindutva has been able to make its presence, in nook and corner in every part of this country.
That is what you call cultural entrenchment.
Cultural entrenchment.
Entrenchment means that creating that digging things for
Digging
themselves.
things, yes, spreading its roots, right?
Spreading and defense, creating its defense and
yes.
frontiers.
Yes. So, because if you look at this work right from Punjab to Arunachal Pradesh, right, from Gujarat, to Bengal. So we have actually people here in this project, the young anthropologist, primarily French anthropologist. One anthropologist, of course, is Lucia Michelotti, is from from Latin America, but she's based in England. She's at LSE and Oxford. These people have been working on these areas for quite some time, and French researchers are very, very meticulous, and they have been working for years. And so we thought that we would give a different approach, right, a different kind of shift, right, to the understanding of Hindutva. So basically, who are these collaborators? Who are the mediators? Is everything is contrived? Is everything is designed, manipulated, maneuvered? That is, in normal understanding of politics, we think that this is the way, or there is something else. So we thought that it is better that we look at these agencies, right? Look at the local roots, look at the collaborators, and if there is a kind of collaboration, why this collaboration is taking place? Are these collaborators all belong to Hindutva camp? They subscribe to the ideology, or is it a kind of sometimes there is a kind of convergence of interest, right? So I think so. That was our the beginning. We thought that we must look at these. So, and what are the forms of mediation, the process of mediation, and why do the people really identify in the far-flung areas? Because Hindutva started as a North Indian phenomenon, starting from Maharashtra, going to Punjab, North India. Then people are saying that look, Hindutva is very, very limited in its geographical context, right, in class, caste context. But if you look at the expansion of Hindutva, then you find that everywhere it has its presence. So to understand this kind of entrenchment,
and without much state support.
Not state support, right? So we thought that we would investigate this deeply, and this project took off for 2-3 years. We had individual presentations by scholars, right? Then we decided that we'll bring out this volume.
Something I find very interesting, particularly to see that how the French scholars are looking at the Indian Hindutva project, but they also feel that they have an issue of what they call the Front National. And the Front National is the nationalist group of France, which is getting a lot of popularity, it seems. And French scholars are a little worried about it, and because there is a concept of creating the other. So it seems that the French people, the French scholars, are trying to see how the other is being created in other societies, so that they can also have some kind of a strategy to handle that the other. In last few decades, it seems in France, probably the Muslims in France, they are facing a lot of problem as the secular credentials of French modern French state suggests that no religious ritual or religious symbols should be used in the public life. And the Hindus of France, it seems, they have adopted a new strategy. They have bifurcated between religion and the culture, and say that religious symbols we are not using outside, the cultural symbols should be allowed to be used, like the pagadi of Sikh is, they say it's a cultural symbol also. So do you think that this kind of frame within which the French scholars are thinking, they are finding the Indian reality a bit difficult to grapple, or is it for them as easy as the French reality itself?
As I told you that the French engagement with India, right, is quite old, in the sense that we have Lumo, right,
Yeah.
and making a very substantial kind of contribution, right. We may or may not agree, right, with the framework. You have scholars, French scholars, particularly anthropologists. There is a strong anthropological tradition, and particularly these anthropologists are, going to choosing a particular site and giving lot of time and energy. So that is one. And if you look at this concept, obviously, when they come to India, they take up Indian issues for research. They are looking at religion, they are looking at communities, right? They are looking at the, construction of the other. So obviously, like it is not the same, right, as you have in the French society. Here, I just give a couple of examples. In the recent case, when actually the French society or the French parliament passed almost a kind of unanimous resolution against burqa, right? You find that there is a strong sense of nationalism, right? And nationalism is so strong. So and French society does not really a multicultural society, right? And when it is not really giving its due to multiculturalism, right? Because this is a kind of French nationalism is very, very homogenized, and there also you find both the the ruling party and the opposition, they come together. Otherwise you cannot have this kind of unanimity, right? As far as French nation is concerned. So, well, there are, again, within that framework of nationalism, you have also, as you mentioned, this Front National, right, which is rightist kind of, organization. And there is also an attempt to see exactly, the French scholar says, whether this Front National is very closer to the VHP, right, not the RSS, right? What is their kind of similarities and differences and so on. But French version of secularism is also different from Indian version of secularism. They what they say is not, they don't use the word secularism, right? The kind of laicity, right? And which is different. But as you said, that who is the other in the French society? As you know that now increasingly Muslims are the other, right? Everywhere in the Western Europe to America. This is one. The other is immigrants. So if you look at this, that in the recent past, there was a kind of continuous riots in the suburb of Paris for 40 days.
Yeah.
And all these, many rioters were burning cars, right, and doing destruction of property. So the French society is actually really in a problem now, because the immigrants have come, they have settled down, but like the question of this complete assimilation, because that it's not multicultural, it wants complete integration and assimilation. So there is a kind of paradox now, that if you really asking for this, and now all these communities are looking for a kind of multicultural lifestyle, and right, so how to resolve this kind of dilemma. So this is actually the French dilemma.
Yeah.
Right?
I request Dr. Jha to say that.
Thank you, Maninder. It's a matter of great, pleasure and privilege to comment on two books written by Professor Pralay Kanoongo, who is not only an authority on Indian politics, but who also, created waves in terms of the thinking about both culture and religion in India after the publication of his first book, that was RSS Tries with Politics. This new edition, in terms of this edited volume, I think that harmonizes well with his larger project, because the first one looks at the macro process of the politics initiated by the Hindutva brand of politics, and this one basically takes the discourse to slightly more micro level. I mean, one can call it a middle range theorization, because not purely the grassroots micro politics, but at the middle level of political process, it tries to capture the larger processes which are normally mistaught by the social science, particularly the craft of political science, which doesn't have much exposure to the ethnographic tradition of research. So I think this is a very welcome development and initiative, and I must give credit to Professor Kanoongo, because the sociologists and anthropologists have been doing it, and as rightly he pointed out, I think that the French tradition is known for that type of research on India, but for political science I think it is very healthy development. Now, coming back to this edited volume, this cultural entrenchment of Hindutva. In fact, in the introduction itself, I think this perhaps this is a French author, I think Barani, yeah, that's right. So I think that introduction itself, he in the introduction itself, he poses few questions which I think that unify the entire project nicely, because so far as this the French growing interest in terms of their engagement with both Hinduism and India, I think he rightly pointed out that their main in fact concern is not with the Hindutva and the kind of secular deviations which normally try to trace in context of India, but perhaps they are more concerned with the politics and strategy to deal with a difference, because they are also struggling perhaps with the same problem, how to deal with a difference. And in context of India, perhaps this is perhaps a very important dimension for their interest, that how Indians have been dealing with difference. Right now, difference normally is posited vis-a-vis Muslims, but in perhaps the area which Professor Kanoongo has analyzed, I think the difference comes not from Islam, but it is coming from Christianity. So the Indian state, which like French, one can call believing in the broad secular principles of non-discrimination. Not of course one can debate that issue, that what is the French model, what is the Indian model, and lot of differences one can find, but nonetheless this entire strategy to deal with a difference is very important point of convergence between the French and the Indians, because they are now struggling, but India has been successfully dealing with a difference, and whenever the deviations have occurred, I think we have found that a lot of resistances also emerge simultaneously in India. So that is one concern which I find perhaps quite prominent in this project and in this book. The other thing which I find Mr. Bharti in his introduction has also pointed out, and had also come out strongly in Professor Kanoongo's piece on Arunachal, and that is basically the kind of entrenchment of the Hindutva values through the cultural bonding between the aboriginals or the tribal communities and some of the value system which Hinduism also believes in, and how that leads to, in fact, if when I was reading it, I was reminded of Weber's elective affinity when he talks of Christianity and Protestantism and the capitalism. So that elective affinity had also to be looked into, that while resisting or confronting the forces which have been called by the Hindutva brigade in northeast as external force like Christianity, and when they tried to resist it, they developed a very favorable chord with the local communities because of sundry symbols and icons. That's why the institutionalization, when they gave slogan of institutionalization of their symbols, they found a very favorable chord. So all these things I think need now more probing and research while talking about this process of the penetration of such macro discourse of Hindutva at the grassroots level in certain parts which had not earlier witnessed the similar phenomena. Now the third thing which I also found in course of the reading the paper on Arunachal by Professor Kanoongo was something regarding secularism, when he talks of state adopting double standards while dealing with Christianity and Hinduism, and some of the state's agencies like army, bureaucracy and other things becoming basically the source through which this dissemination of some of the values which Hindutva brand of politics these days are preaching. I think they have become the agencies through which they have been percolating down to the grassroots level. So in that sense, what the author is trying to tell us that a state's double standard has led to a kind of a discriminatory approach vis-a-vis two religions. That on the one hand banned Christianity when they found that Christian missionary activities were spreading in different parts of the society. On the other hand, when the state discovered that its own arms were intimately involved in this process, perhaps didn't take the similar measures which they took when it was the question of Christianity and other thing. Now that is tied well with this secularism, that the failure of secularism. But one would like to pose a question, that because you see what we have found, that in colonial period the missionary activities has been discussed and delineated nicely, that how they came and how they started spreading their activities in northeastern part of the country. But immediately after independence, I think we don't get a much deeper understanding that how the state dealt with that thing. Now, because the counter resistance from the Hindutva brigade of politics emerges later, when one of the ex-army men turned bureaucrat turned governor is at the helm of affairs. But the first few years after the independence, how this Christian missionary activities was dealt with the state system in northeast India, that I think perhaps is also required for having a more comprehensive picture of the entire thing. Now secondly, the another issue which is something related to this is the Nehru-Alvin discourse. I mean, because all of us know that how Alvin perhaps tried to push forward the Nehruvian agenda of assimilation, the modernist assimilation, and tribals were also not spared from that. Right now, the thing is that this Nehru-Alvin assimilation policy, perhaps there is some indication that Alvin was also not quite happy with the missionary activities, because he thought that the traditional communitarian identity of tribals would be submerged under this kind of process. But what is interesting, that this Nehru-Alvin assimilationist discourse and subsequently post Nehru period, when we find that the difference discourse becoming more prominent. So the moment the assimilationist discourse, at a time when assimilationist discourse was at the helm of affairs, we find that this missionary activities of the Christian groups are moving unchecked. But the moment the difference discourse comes into existence, the Hindutva brand of politics gets entrenched. So that perhaps is a kind of puzzle, that whether the difference discourse is more in harmony with the Hindutva brand of politics than the assimilationist politics or a strategy which the state adopts, which is antithetical to this brand of politics, or this is a kind of puzzle which one finds in the entire discourse presented in the paper so nicely by Professor Kanoongo. So I would like to know some of his observations on.
Well, for me, it was very difficult to really explore, right, Arunachal Pradesh, which is a quite distant, quite at a distance from Delhi, and but I have made series of visits. Regarding this, you are talking of this first phase, particularly immediately after independence. This is also linked to Nehru-Elwyn's policy. Nehru-Elwyn's policy, what you are talking, this assimilationist policy, but it, of course, in one sense, yes. But the other thing is that, they said that tribals should be allowed to preserve, protect their culture, right? That was a policy for which, in fact, Nehru and Elwyn policy is criticized by the elites of Arunachal Pradesh. There is a kind of paradox. They say that, look, they want to, these indigenous religious leaders, they want to preserve their religion, okay, but they are critical of Nehru, right? Because Nehru-Elwyn policy was also in a way checked missionary entry to Arunachal Pradesh. So in fact it has benefited, right, in a way to these indigenous religious communities to preserve their identity, right? Because if you look at the way actually missionaries, the Christianity is growing, right? This indigenous religious population was, getting, eroded, right, in every census.
Yeah, I think, can I just suggest something? I think, imagine I am a person from Arunachal, and I had two choices between Christianity and Hindutva, or Hinduism if you want to call it, whatever is there. What choice would I make? As you are suggesting, and I agree with you, that if I become a Christian, I lose my identity completely, because everything is different now. As the photograph that you have given, it shows that if you become a Hindu, if I become a Hindu, then at least the photograph of my God will be getting a place in the larger Hindu domain. But in the Christian conversion, you lose your identity completely. So is that the reason why in Arunachal it's easier for them to convert into, Hinduism is not conversion, I think, it's just start taking themselves as Hindu. Is it because that's becoming very easy for them to manage it?
Look, this indigenous community leaders, right, religious leaders, they are not calling themselves as Hindus.
Okay.
They are actually calling themselves, in the name of their indigenous, tribes, they are calling themselves Adis, Nishis, and they say that we have a religion since time immemorial, right? And we are followers of this, religion, which is nature worship, animal worship, right? All these. And there are similarities between Hinduism and this. That you cannot say. So in that sense, they are calling
Natural
Christianity, they say that, this is an alien religion.
Right.
So Christianity for them is an alien religion. And the other thing very interesting, that when we are talking of Hindutva, you say that whether they will opt for Hindutva, it is actually not, Hindutva versus Christianity. It is also, Christianity versus their own religion,
That's
indigenous religion. Yeah. So what is happening is that they are arguing that, look, once you are converted, right, then you have to forget your own religion, because Christianity never allows you to retain remnants of even your past,
what they call paganism.
Right. So they say that, okay, so this is an alien religion. So you find that in the families also there are so many other things. Hindutva, what it very smartly it does is that, okay, you can retain your own religion, right, and also at the same time you can become part of the larger identity. So, but they are not saying that, look, if you look at this in my article, I am saying, so they are building their own temples. In those temples, if you, whether it is ganging, in Adis have the temples, they call it gangings, right? So, and Nether Namlo is the Nishi temples. So in those temples, you don't find, Hindu gods and goddesses. They have their own gods and goddesses, right? So that is the thing. So that is why you find also that there is a kind of convergence, right?
And their gods and goddesses can easily be accommodated in 33 crores.
They are already there. In fact, their ideologue, that I have also mentioned, they're saying that what are the they say that, okay, Hindus say Om and we say Keum, right? So they have
Phonetic similarity.
they have Shastras, we have Abangs, right? So we have oral traditions. So the religion says that, look, there is a strong oral tradition in Arunachal and all these among these, communities, tribal communities. So there, they say that in fact the entire movement is now trying to revive
their
their own tradition.
So Hindutva allows that space for
Absolutely,
them, and therefore it
absolutely.
becomes popular.
Well, there is a collaboration. There is a collaboration where Hindutva is also, trying to design, the gods and goddesses, inventing their gods and goddesses, right? Preservation of their culture, organizing seminars and conferences, talking of the natural, medicine, right? Local medicine. So all these. So when
But do you think in this case, sorry, I just,
please.
do you think in this case there is a possibility that these French scholars would fail to really capture the difference between naturally available space for what you call Hinduism and artificially space being created by Hinduism? And there is a possibility of confusion between the two, because I was looking at the article on Kumbh Mela. Now, if you look at the history of Kumbh, there has been time, and in different historical times you find that emerging forces would make their presence felt in that. But you would not say that it is being organized by now particular force, because if the kind of number of human population that come to visit that Mela is so huge that no political organization can claim that it's actually running it. If today VHP is becoming very popular there, just by doing what you call seva in this book, they are talking about seva, how through seva RSS tries to make its place. But no amount of seva can be so powerful there that they can control the Kumbh Mela's consciousness. Because the Kumbh Mela's consciousness is less political consciousness and more cultural consciousness. So do you think there is a possibility that these people who have actually their own religion as a very organized church kind of thing, they would not be able to capture the more fuzzy boundaries of Hinduism?
Well, I don't agree, with your observation. Well, it is likely that people get confused. You are absolutely right with your hypothesis. But what is happening that the scholars actually writing in this volume, they are very serious scholars in the sense that they understand this dichotomy, right? And that is one. The other thing is that, well, there are also, when we also go to Kumbh and see, a particular site, right, we are also, sometimes we are confused, right? Because sometimes, as you say, that Kumbh is also very complex. It does not suggest that, certainly it is not Hindutva.
No.
Right? And absolutely not. Right?
Lakhs and lakhs people, poor people come
and
stay there for a month.
particularly the diversities.
Yeah,
Actually, Hinduism's diversity, right, is represented, right, in such a manner.
Similarly, let me just give another example on that the article on Vinayak Chaturthi in Tamil Nadu. Assuming that since Vinayak Chaturthi became very popular, or this Bolbam means going to the Shiva's temple has become very popular, that would not automatically mean that this is orchestrated by Hindutva politics. Well, look at Bengal, where left ruled for 30 years. There has been huge rise in Durga Puja. So that's why I'm saying do you think there is a possibility of confusion in capturing this kind of growth in religion as such, and assuming that this growth is caused by Hindutva?
No, what you are saying, in fact, this point has been reiterated in our work. In one of the articles on Bharat Sevashram Sangh.
Right.
Right? There, the author is suggesting how in Bengal, under the the regime of the CPIM, the Communist Party. This organization was allowed to propagate, to take part or to organize various seva projects, right? It has grown, so it is in fact showing that it is not exactly countering, right? So this is what
some of the articles actually are showing
articles
that, right?
are showing this kind of thing,
Right.
and this book is primarily into three sections, divided into three themes. The first one is showing that how this entrenchment is, in a way facilitated by the RSS, the Sangha Parivar, and the other organizations, and directly how they are actually contributing
I'm
to the
particularly concerned
entrenchment.
about this word entrenchment, using such a strong word, as if entrenchment is produced or created in order to defend a kind of space. So you dig a huge space so that you can defend it from attack from outside. So do you think it sounds conspiratorial, that whatever is happening in Hinduism today, whatever resurgence of religion is worldwide phenomenon, everywhere it's happening. So do you think it's part of the conspiracy by the RSS, or is it spontaneous RSS is taking advantage of that?
No, that is actually what we are saying, that one is that in some spaces, right, the RSS is consciously
Doing it.
organizing,
Yeah.
managing.
Right.
That is
Right.
one. That is one part.
Right.
The second theme is that in some places, there, people who are involved in their project of Hinduism, right?
They're only mediating.
They mediating, and there, it is the relationship circumstantial, right? It is not exactly that it is there, or suppose somebody, like this article on yoga, Karandika in Maharashtra, right? He was a former RSS Swayamsevak, but in his program, right, you find that he is pursuing his program on his own, right? But also he uses some RSS rhetorics and something while giving his discourse and so on. So this is not exactly planned and strategized by the RSS. This is one. The third section is suggesting that this entrenchment is possible also
Through negation.
through negation, because people who are actually negating, right, the ideology of the
They
RSS,
also
resisting
accommodate
the
that.
ideology, they are also using their rhetorics, right? Say for instance, there's a very fine article by one of the editors of this volume, Nicholas Joule, right? He's talking that how, particularly looking at the sweeper Valmiki community,
Valmiki, right.
right? And how, they are saying that Ambedkar is a Valmiki, right? And, the relationship of Valmikis with the RSS organization, right? So you find that there is also resistance to Hindu nationalist discourse, but at the same time they are using certain construction, right, of the RSS. So this is little
But that
complex.
could be, that could be in a different situation also. Just I think it's possible to when there is a kind of contradiction between two phenomena. It's possible that there is some kind of dialectical negotiation, and you accommodate certain things and then counter that. If you don't accommodate anything, then probably it's difficult to counter that too. Suppose RSS picks up the text from Indian tradition and says that these are the great texts. Now if you say they are not great texts, then you fell into what is the left trap. Left has abandoned every cultural symbol and given very easily to the RSS. But if you try to appropriate them also, then you are in this trap, what you are suggesting, that you are still accommodating RSS in you. So there is a possibility of confusion in this complex situation, because Hinduism is such a complex thing. Indian judiciary has not been able to define what is Hinduism as yet. Sometimes they say it is way of life, sometimes they say it is culture, sometimes they say it is religion. So that's why I am trying to hint to this point, that do you think this kind of the kind of limitations that the scholars have due to their inability to understand this complexity plays big in this? But I'll request Satish to
In fact, just one thing which came to my mind while I was reading this book. This is regarding the construction of identity, or the consciousness around identity, which is reinforced. Sometimes it develops, and there are certain forces and certain agencies which have been dealt in this book. For example, the organization, the Hindutva organization, and it has been discovered that they have played role in certain areas, but at times even without their active involvement, because of certain other forces at work, I think that identity has been further strengthened. The process of othering in context of Arunachal, I mean this Christianity, or in fact the state process. But what I observed that there is some amount of silence at times on the role the market forces in post 90s are playing.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Now I think that whether this Hindutva brand of politics has got a boost with
Affinity with the market,
the
yeah.
post 90 period, with the market forces being unleashed and the state becoming little bit a kind of a remote spectator, or because the initial phase we don't find the ascendancy in those pockets when the state was proactive, but only when the state's proactivity is reduced, we find that there is a growth. So that perhaps a kind of a space which I find that should be adequately filled.
Yeah, some people say that God is a good enterprise.
So that way.
No, you are absolutely right. Actually, we have not included this. This is a very important aspect. In fact, it requires another volume, right? This is such a huge area, and there is not much work on this. And what you are saying that this upsurge of Hindutva in the post liberalization period in India, and the role of market and so on. I know Maninder has been working, and that how different new religious movement groups are coming.
Yeah.
You find proliferation of these channels, right? Religious channels, right? But the question is very important that in the post, the RSS has also tried to, in a way, at least conceptually, by throwing up the concept of Swadeshi, right? Which really, in a way, also this is also, this globalization has also thrown up challenges for the RSS itself. One is of course you see that there is a resurgence, but on the other hand you also find there is a challenge in the sense that nowadays RSS is not able to get so much cadre, right? So globalization has changed that in a way.
But there is a decline in even political parties.
Decline, yes.
Left parties also have no cadres.
So this is another thing, that, but only thing is that the kind of insecurity, right, both economic, psychological, right, existential, that is growing at many places. That also helps these organizations to pitch in, to fill in that space. Who is the state? You are absolutely right. The state is withdrawing. Say for instance, school system, for instance, when it is there are two kinds of, you have government schools which have completely abandoned, right, their kind of intervention. So you have private schools which are completely exorbitant, for the common man to have a kind of entry. So at that time, the RSS organizations find it very useful, and so they charge a reasonable fees, right, so that a common man can send and get a quality education also. Of course, you can say that of course it's a kind of communal orientation, right, indoctrination, right, and so on. But at the same time,
it is argued here, it's very difficult to say.
Yes.
Because sometimes people have worked, and this also mentioned here, that they are more interested in their success than in RSS ideology. You mentioned here, right.
But this market and the globalization, has a double meaning for an organization like RSS. For example, on the one hand, the Swadeshi Manch would like to resist the external, market forces, but then there are certain other elements within the indigenous market which are, quite, in harmony ideologically with, the RSS and similar sister organizations. I think you have also hinted at one or two places the influx of the Marwaris at certain period, and with them, a certain Hindu, kind of symbols and other thing getting entrenched into their society. So I think that particular constituency, with which with the advent of the market, the indigenous forces of the market can give a new push to this type of politics. And 90s perhaps is one has to test that how, because state is becoming little bit less proactive in that period. So the global thing is basically that creates a dilemma, because on the one hand they have to counter that with Swadeshi Manch and other thing, but at the same time they also want that the indigenous elements of the market.
This is a very interesting point, as you have rightly mentioned. In fact, this is the dilemma of the RSS, and you find that their economic policy is contradictory, right? The serious contradictions. That one is there, as you are right, that they always talk in terms of they allow internal liberalization, right? So there would be a level playing field, people would compete, right? There is no license quota Raj. It would facilitate our own indigenous business, but at the same time they say want to shut the door for the outside players. This is not like Advani. I remember a long time back they say, okay, no to potato chips but yes to computer chips, right? So this is a very kind of fancy slogan, but it did not work. It would not work. You cannot really dictate, right? You cannot say that okay, of course, but there is a strong point that suppose the liberalization in China, right? If you compare India and China, you find that China is carrying forward its economic policy on its own terms, whereas we are not able to do it. So there is an element in that, but the RSS has not developed, right, that policy in a comprehensive way.
I think that also it seems that there is a section of right-wing politics which is talking about this, but there is another larger section of it which is actually not serious about it. Therefore, it seems the Swadeshi movement of RSS never picked up. They published a list of items which we can consume and all, but it never picked up. So it seems it's a rhetorical thing in order to attach with nation. But if you go into deeper politics of that, I think the Indian capitalist class at that time was interested in collaboration, wanted the foreign capital. So they are right wing basically means that they are actually capitalist oriented mind. They would like to have global capital intervening at various places. Only when it becomes dangerous for the nation so called, then they would like to stop that. And it's very difficult to now define national interest, whether it lies in stopping global capital to come to India or getting global capital in India. So I think at one stage everybody started saying that Congress has hijacked the BJP agenda by liberalizing and all. So both are competing in that.
Yes.
So it seems
you are absolutely right. In fact, I would say that while only a small section were supporting this Swadeshi agenda, most of them are opposing. They are not just neutral, because they wanted that they have to hobnob with, because it is not the RSS the ideological front, it is also the political front, the ruling party, the BJP, right? So when actually they are competing with others and so on, so at that time they have very very kind of open liberal policy where they invite FDI. So there are differences between the Sangh Parivar, the ideological wing and the political wing. So that is always there, and you are right that like actually the Congress party was able to really hijack right,
agenda,
and
so it's the agenda of the Indian ruling class,
and
both actually support that kind of agenda, it seems. And now I'd like to you have any other thing? And I'd like to know a little more about this Arunachal thing that you have written. Do you think that in the whole of the Northeast, people say that when the church controls an area, that control is quite absolute, in the sense that even if you want to marry if you are a Christian in that area and you want to marry, you need to take a certificate from the church that you have been attending the church. And I am told that if you migrate from that area to another area, you need to register yourself in the other church, which will ask you to get a certificate from there. Do you think that in Northeast, where Christianity has grown in this way, and that also repels the local communities from getting into this kind of thing? Because local community, I guess, is quite free. They don't want to be controlled by any.
What had happened that, like after, colonialism entered into the Northeast, the major part, like Nagaland, Mizoram, you find that almost, more than 90%, 95%,
Christian,
became Christians. But before 200 years, right, they had their own indigenous religion. And, well, church plays a very, very important role, right, in society, in culture, in politics, right. It is taking a very primary.
It's controlling role. That's what is worrying.
It is controlling. It also gives dictates and so on.
That's right.
But also, I think that people are also questioning, because the role of the church, and with the rising of the militant movement, sometimes also the church is asking for a kind of peace. Sometimes, right, which the militants are also ignoring. So there are different contradictions, right, that is also emerging in that kind of. Then church is also not exactly a kind of homogeneous group. There are also divisions, right, within the church. Then also the church itself is now being challenged.
Yeah, it's also an innocent organization. It's a politically active organization.
Of course. It has its own agenda,
politics and agenda,
so on. But in case of Arunachal, actually, when you find that now only around maybe 40% are indigenous, or I'm just forgetting the statistics, maybe 60%. So there is a huge decline, right? And so it is not exactly. So they want to really these religious indigenous religious group communities, they want to protect. They want to form actually one kind of identity, right? So there are two groups. So that is why there is Donipolism, right? Is one identity under which the most of the important tribes are coming together. So to in a way resist, but it is actually really a challenging kind of task. One doesn't know exactly for how long they would be able to resist, right? The kind of Christian
dominance in the area. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the strategy of Christian, what is the difference between the strategy of Christian church and the RSS? One difference that we discussed earlier was that probably RSS tried to suggest that you will not have to forgo your identity, you will retain that. What do you think is the other one? Like church, generally the church has one basic strategy that you provide social services, you provide education and health care, and that's how you attract people and you get them converted. RSS also probably has a seva kind of thing through which they want to convert, particularly in Jharkhand and all, we have seen that. So do you think there is any other difference between the two in the strategy of conversion?
Well, one is that of course the RSS or Hindutva has imitated the church agenda.
Okay.
Right? So if Arunachal actually it has grown, or it is able to really check Christianity, it is primarily because through its educational agenda.
Okay.
So Vivekanand Kendra has opened several schools in the state, and since 70s, so you find that it has provided education to maybe 10,000 students are enrolled now. So for years it has been educating these things. So and Vivekananda schools are very, very popular, right, among the Arunachalis. So they would always prefer, right, to send their children to Vivekananda schools. And the people who are passed out from Vivekananda school, right, they are now in bureaucracy, they are engineers, doctors, they are the elite. And in fact, my argument is that in a way they are promoting, right, the Hindutva's cause, right. So this is, same thing was done by Christian missionaries. There is a Lakhimpur school, right, Janford school at Lakhimpur is the border area. Before missionaries that you were asking, that actually missionaries were operating from the border area of Assam, because you are not, so they were also sneaking into the territory, sometimes, you know, in different disguise, right. I have also mentioned, so they have come as carpenters, some other thing, so the missionaries coming and, you know, they are doing it. And that particular school has also produced the future, you know, propagators, preachers. So schools have played important role in this, and so the agenda is almost the similar.
But the Christian schools are relatively secular in the sense that they allow anybody to enter into the school, and they don't ask them to convert their religion. Whereas in the BJP, as in this Saraswati Sisu Mandir or Vivekananda school, do you think that other communities can also study there? The percentage of Christians or Muslims studying in Vivekananda schools or RSS schools must be very low, I guess, whereas the percentage of Hindus and Muslims getting educated in the missionary schools should be much more higher. What do you think?
Well, I have not really investigated it, you know, looked at the percentage, right, but as far as I understand, it is also open. Vivekananda school is also open to everybody, right. It is not restricting Christian students to come in. And whenever, I think there is another point, I think perhaps we are missing, that, you know, like when you are operating in a, you know, majority area, right, say for instance, you know, most of the populations are Hindus, right, obviously you know, any Christian schools would get more number of Hindu students. So that is one, I am not saying, so there is, of course, they are not discriminating. And also I don't think that Vivekananda schools, because you know, I have not really investigated that, but Vivekananda school also is very open in that sense.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And like Christian schools, as we see everywhere, they have certain religious agenda, but they don't blatantly propagate that. Would you think these RSS schools, they also play in the same way, that they don't ideologically, they don't try to push that point too much, and with these children they want to focus merely on education? Or they have some subtle ways of ideologically motivating them?
Look, they have certain programs, right? Like, you know, they have a physical exercise, they have Surya Namaskar, right? They have a kind of intellectual training, you know, they have some programs on local culture, traditions. So it is little innovative, I would say. And they don't really emphasize too much on religion, but on religious nationalism, right? So the question is that Indianness, right? That we are all nationalists, right? So so nationalism, and also, you know, there are certain prayers and Surya Namaskar. So Surya Namaskar is, you know, they say that Arunachal, you know, is the land of the rising sun, right? So we must start with that. So that is, so it is your culture, it is not religion. If you are really worshipping, so in that sense you find the convergence between indigenous, you know, community and this. So that is why there is a success.
You know, something related to this nationalism, I mean the local versus national, because, you know, this indigenous communities have a tendencies to cling on to their own, you know, culture, cultural identity, etc. But we find that gradually there is a move to, you know, construct a larger national identity, and there are two forces at operation. I think in the introduction, as it has been pointed out, one is the banal nationalism, which has been pointed out, and another is, you know, the nation building process which the state has been undertaking over the years. But what is in fact found here in terms of the larger discourse, that banal nationalism has been more effective compared to the state nationalism, whereas for state nationalism, anti-colonialism was the reference point. For banal nationalism, perhaps the Chinese aggression and the China factor is the reference point.
So we are running out of time. Thank you very much, Professor Pralay Kanoongo and Dr. Satish Jha. It was a very lively discussion.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a lot.